what is actually the root question that we're answering or problem we're trying to solve. And techno-solutionism just skips over it. Like, we don't need to solve, we don't need to answer, we don't need to solve, we just throw tech at it, it'll be fine.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. We look at the big invisible forces acting on us. And AI right now is acting on us in some really fundamental ways. I would argue that it is going to change the nature of things like love and work and democracy. And yet, knowing how the companies that are making the decisions that are going to change all of that are actually making those decisions is a very difficult thing. It's hard to get into the room where it happens, as they say in Hamilton. And that's why I came to this week's guest. Olivia Gambelin is somebody who has managed to carve out a career as a consultant to AI companies here in the United States, and then flies across the world to Brussels to advise regulators there on some of the most stringent, and I would argue some of the most thoughtful regulations being imposed anywhere in the Western world. She is literally seeing how these companies make these choices and how these regulators react to those choices. And all of that, I think, makes her an extremely interesting person to talk to. It is very hard to get inside these places, and her ability to go in there and think about, how do we impose some ethics? How do we convince these companies that imposing some ethics is not only good to do, but good for their business? These are big questions that she is grappling with every day. I found her perspective extremely interesting, not least because it really tells us what these companies know and don't know about what they are creating and how it's going to affect all of us. I hope you enjoyed this hour-long conversation with Olivia Gambelin. Olivia, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jake. Been looking forward to it.
So let's do your biography. Let's describe for people how you came to the position you are. The reason I wanted to speak with you is because you occupy these two worlds. You get to both be in the halls of the regulators in Brussels who are trying to think these things through and speak to them, but you're also in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. And so tell us how you got to be in this position of being the go-between there.
I would say a lot of it has to do with me just being stubborn at the end of the day. But truly how I came to be in this position, at least the split between San Francisco and Brussels. So I grew up in the Bay Area. So I like to joke that techie was my first second language that I learned. I grew up immersed in, my high school was one of the first high schools that had the iPad kids. So my senior year, they gave all the kids an iPad. Obviously, we had to course correct a little bit because we were given iPads with zero parental controls or restrictions on them.
Tell us about that. What was the effect of that on, like, how did that go right and how did that go wrong?
Well, I think for me, I doodled a lot more. I had a lot of really cool doodles because I found I can't even remember what the app was back then, but the one that I could do all these colors and cool patterns. And that resulted in me paying a lot less attention during class. Only because I really liked it.
That sounds pretty good. I feel like you're the good example. It would seem to me.
Exactly, I was like the mid-range one. Exactly.
Doodling is not the crisis we've all been worried about with America's youth. No.
Yeah. Other end of that spectrum, though, was at least at my high school, there was a lot of online shopping and gambling, as it turned out. So
Right.
During class, parents were not necessarily happy because, of course, the iPads somehow or some reason were connected to their cards. So you can imagine some of that pushback that happened. Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. That's crazy. Wow. Right. So I would imagine this for you creates at least an early sense of, hey, this stuff is very cool, but it can go very, very wrong.
Exactly. And it was also the space too that we're like the guinea pigs for any new tech, at least in the Bay Area. So anytime there was new technology coming out, I was so used to seeing it that by the time it reached friends outside of the Bay Area or outside of California, it was old news for us, which means we also saw a lot of the really questionable tech, not even necessarily tech that was malicious, but more of just, why does this exist? One of my favorites is the pizza delivery robot. At the end of the day, pizza delivery is like perfect high school job, but did we really need a robot to deliver it?
Right.
Nope.
Right. That's right. A problem. What is that? A solution looking for a problem. That's right.
Exactly.
So from an early time, would you say that instilled in you a sense of like, was there a sort of a sense of, oh, the market is going to do, for me, like, I think my experience covering tech has been all about the market's going to do what it's going to do. Here are these very interesting, innovative ideas, and then money gets involved and weird choices, are made. Mixed incentives wind up sort of ruining things. That's kind of how I ended up feeling about it. As a young person, where did you wind up in thinking about the innovations, good and bad uses, and what to do with that?
Yeah. Well, back then I didn't have the words for it, but it was this I had a growing frustration around techno-solutionism of
Hmm.
let's just throw tech at it. That'll solve it. We don't actually have to understand the problem or anything around it. We'll just engineer it away. And I now I understand myself a lot better too, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I went the track of philosophy. I love digging down to what is the root problem here? What is actually the root question that we're answering or problem we're trying to solve? And techno-solutionism just skips over it. Like we don't need to solve, we don't need to answer, we don't need to solve. We just throw tech at it, it'll be fine. So wasn't it was both it both gave me this baseline technical literacy that I am incredibly grateful for, but it also gave me that underlying frustration of we can do this better. We have such interesting technology. Why do we keep trying to solve things that don't for non-existent problems? And I think that's inspired a lot of my work as it stands today.
Right, right. So then, briefly, how did you get from that person to now standing in Brussels and boardrooms?
Yeah. So the Brussels side was a little bit of a longer path. I ended up as a contract. I was on contract in Brussels at one point as a data privacy researcher before GDPR came out. And if you're familiar with GDPR, that's the reason why you have to consent to cookies anytime you're in the EU.
Right. The
It
big
was
and in many cases wherever you are now, right? Whether you're in California or the EU, that's right. They
exactly.
it's their privacy law, which we lack in the United States, but it's their national cross-border privacy law, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was on contract data privacy research pre GDPR, starting to look at, well, what will this new incoming regulation do? What will some of the impacts be from it? And it was there that I ran across the conversation around data ethics. That was the first time I ever heard data or AI ethics. And this is back to my original answer. I'm stubborn. I heard that at an event and I said, that's what I'm going to do. And
Mm.
I walked out of that conference room and I've been focused on this space ever since. Brussels over time developed though into both my European hub, but also a lot of the AI policy that impacts on a global scale comes out of Brussels. So it made sense as my career has developed, as my work has developed, that I have a foot both on the edge of AI innovation and on the edge of AI regulation. Both have such a strong indicator for where this technology is going to go. It gives me the breadth of understanding that's necessary to really navigate this space.
Right, right. And you went on to found, so Ethical Intelligence is, as I understand it, an advisory network of AI ethics practitioners. Is that right? You put that together?
Yeah, so ethical intelligence EI is one of my early days attempts at figuring out how to well at establishing responsible AI as an industry. EI still exists. We are a professional network of responsible AI and ethics practitioners. We focus a little bit more on education and community building now, whereas in the past, it was solely focused on consulting and providing advisory services. That was mainly because back 7, 8 years ago, there were really clear standards of how this work was done or what it looked like. So you had to pull in multiple different expertise in order to execute on a project that now one person has the ability to do. So, for example, any project that EI staffed, we always had someone from the humanities, so an ethicist like myself. We had a technologist, and we had a third person that was either policy or industry related, depending on the project's needs. And back then, we needed that many brains on one project if we're building one framework because there were so many unknowns that we were trying to grapple with. As time has gone, of
Can
course.
can you give me just a quick example of like what was one of those, right? Like I'm thinking trio of smart people brought in by a company because they're going to build a thing. What give me an example if you can of the kind of thing you guys were banging your heads against at that time.
Yeah. Ooh, we had some good ones. one that immediately comes to mind, we worked with a group of housing, social housing, not societies, social housing groups in the UK. And they had been tasked with actually regulated to meet a certain standard for environmental impact. And their idea was, well, we're going to use smart home technology, so AI-powered smart home appliances, in order to help reduce that carbon footprint, their environmental impact. Now, this is social housing, which means these are people that are disadvantaged. So these are single moms or single dads, single parents. These are people that are transitioning out of the criminal system into society. These are kids even that have left home and are supporting themselves. So highly sensitive groups essentially were in these houses. And when you're bringing smart home technology into your home, you are opening up all sorts of different risks. And these were already at risk communities coming into these homes. Now, the intention behind it was good. Yes, we're gonna reduce the carbon footprint here. We're gonna use technology to help, turn the lights off when no one's at home or things like that. And what we ended up doing, we worked with this housing group, or that this housing group actually brought us on board to build out a procurement framework. So when an AI vendor or a smart home vendor is coming to this one of the housing groups, it was a collective of them that came together for this project. And they're coming to sell like a smart heater or a smart front porch light, something as simple as that. The housing groups had a procurement framework that they could walk through to say, is this a use case that we actually want? Is this a vendor that we can trust? And how do we actually transition this into application for our residents in a way that doesn't feel like they're being surveilled and that they feel like they're still in control of their home? So it was a pretty hefty procurement framework at the end of the day. It had a lot of different pieces, but it helped those housing associations be able to move forward and actually effectively reduce their carbon footprints at the end of the day without having the backlash, basically without taking advantage of their residents.
Yeah, right. So I can really imagine the ways in which this feels like the classic, like a very well-intentioned idea. Let's turn off the lights every time nobody's home becomes a signal to your ex who you've escaped an abusive situation with that you are not home and that's the time to break in, or that's whenever is asleep and that's the time to break in, whatever it is, right? These like human sensitivities that people who have designed these very smart, very efficient things probably haven't taken into account, and that's where you guys come in. But so I almost am frightened to ask this. Why isn't that as common idea? Like, I like the idea. I would like to have a humanities person, a technologist, and an industry or policy person on board for every project. Is the vibe I'm getting from you that is no longer how it works?
For big projects, yes, that is still how things run. It's also how a lot of responsible AI and ethics teams are being built out, to have these different inputs in them. Now, I guess in reference to ethical intelligence, there's a lot of in-house teams, and the projects have taken on kind of a different role now. And a lot of the skill sets, because over the years we were able to find patterns of this is what a good procurement framework looks like, or this is what a strong bias workflow looks like. I'm naming off a couple of things that we usually build. There are patterns now to all of that, and there are databases and expertise that have been built up. So now one person can take that on, not because they have all of the expertise, but we now have the resources to be able to spread out more so, which is a good thing, because having 3 people on one project makes it a little bit harder to scale that kind of work, because you're bringing in so many cooks into one kitchen.
Right. Are you, as a result, sort of reassured that the next time, a public housing project wants to put in smart lights, they'll have the expertise, they'll have gathered the expertise from somewhere about that? I worry that what you're saying is that the guidelines are now inside companies and they're making the decisions inside. And I would much rather somebody from the outside with no political connection to anybody inside the room be the one. And I don't know, like I feel like people bump into the same problems again and again and again when it comes to tech. Like, do you feel like we've solved a bunch of these problems, or at least that people have the resources they need?
We have, I'm going to say yes and no to this. Yes, meaning there's a lot of these problems that we have solved. Are those solutions actually getting into place? That's the bigger question. That's where it becomes a little bit more, I wouldn't jump to saying yes on that. But to
Right.
your point, actually being internal versus external, part of the reason ethical intelligence has transitioned into being more community education based is a lot of us are independent consultants. And I myself have focused more on just operating as an independent consultant externally. I don't go in-house. I always stay external because I provide that almost like sanity check. And I also sit outside of the corporate politics, which let me tell you, an AI is really handy to have.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So let's talk about that, right? Like you come in with neutral authority, and give people a sense of like, because again, you're sort of our inside voice here. We get to know through you in theory how these companies are making choices and how they are thinking about the deployment of this stuff. I'm always asked, well, what were they thinking when they rolled this kind of thing out? And you have been at some of these tables to hear how that thinking works.
Yeah.
So give us a sense now of what these engagements are like. You come in with neutral authority to do what in theory?
To make sure it's like, let me put it this way. A lot of the questions and considerations that happen around responsible AI and ethics, that takes a lot of brain power. You have so many different factors you have to consider. I'm looking at political factors. I'm looking at technical feasibility. I'm looking at societal implications. I have to know so many different pieces to make one decision. Now, I've been trained to make those decisions. I have mental frameworks that I work through. I stay on top of all of these different elements so that it is far easier for me to make that decision because of all that background that I've built up. So when it comes to sitting in, say, the boardroom, and people are trying to grapple with, hey, what's the right decision to make here? That can take a lot of mental power. It takes a lot of emotional effort. It takes a lot of consideration. You use someone like me to outsource some of that processing. This is processing that you cannot outsource to technology. You can outsource to someone that is trained and paid to stay on top of it. So that's that neutral authority that I'm bringing in. I can actually give reference point to say, hey, I've got other clients that do it like this. It didn't go well. Or I saw another client you do it like this and it went really well. Let's pull some pieces in there. Hey, if you asked about San Francisco versus Brussels, I'm like, hey, we've got a new development coming, or there's a new regulation coming. Here's some things we need to consider. So I've got the eagle eye and the neutrality where I don't care if it goes through or not, meaning like, I don't care if an AI project goes through or not. It's down to the company at the end of the day. So I'm not fearful of bringing up something that need to be considered, but worry that it will derail a project because at the end of the day, I want the project to be successful, but it's not tied to my job.
Yeah. How often are you in the position where you come in, someone tells you, we'd like to proceed along these lines, and have a values aligned approach to this? I know a framework you talk about, a values canvas that you use, right, with teams to sort of sketch out how they should be thinking about these things. How often do you walk into an environment like that and there is a project on the table and it's your job to say, you guys shouldn't do this project? Like, do you ever find yourself in that position where because that in theory is the ultimate test of your neutral authority, is are you willing to be the only person, or, are you ever in the position where you have to be the only person to be like, you know what, let's not do this one?
I have actually been, I'm actually pretty grateful. I have not been in the position where I'm the only one in the room saying no. And I think it's for two reasons. One is I I think I rarely ever said no myself. I've said yes, but, or yes, and, because there's usually some element that can be salvaged. There's usually some little right-hand turn to make to get it back on track. So I'm not coming in, I'm not the naysayer. I'm not the one that's going, no, 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 this is all bad. And if I do have to say no in any way, I'm offering a different solution off the back of it. Like, no, because of these reasons, but it is a yes if we do this, if we go and if we take the other road. So I think for that example, for that reason, I'm not typically the one sitting there being the project blocker. The second reason, though, being is if it is something that is dangerous, that has far too much risk. One of my now you're getting some of my techniques. One of my techniques is to figure out who around that let's say it's a table, who around that table has something on the line. Like, where is the risk being shouldered and burdened? Who's heading that function? And then speak directly to them. Okay, this is what this means. You're
like
saying
offline, like take them aside to do that?
Take them aside, or depends on the relationship between everyone in the room and the politics behind it all. But have that conversation, maybe one or two people, and say, this is the risk you're taking on. Are you prepared for that? And that creates this. It's not me saying no; it's the other person saying, hold on, that's a poor business decision at the end of the day. So I think for those two reasons, I've never found myself in a position where it is only me saying, no, this is bad. What were you thinking?
Yeah. When we come back, we'll get deeper into this question of yes or no to AI developments with Olivia. Stay with us. I've been in the position many times of speaking to people in the industry these days about ethics. Occasionally I get brought in to talk to some company or something, and I will say it is less and less common to find myself in the position where the company, I just am finding that fewer and fewer companies seem interested in this question, basically. They either seem to feel that they have it solved or that it's not really their problem. And the breakneck desire to get into this AI moment as hard and as fast as they possibly can seems stronger now than it has sort of ever been. It feels like that flywheel is picking up momentum.
No.
Is that your experience? Are people more hell-bent than ever on moving forward with AI stuff, or do you think there is still room in an organization that worries about its business prospects for thinking things through the way you would want them to?
So yes, we are very hell-bent on bringing AI in as fast as possible. However, companies, at least companies in more traditional spaces and industries, ones that aren't traditionally tech forward, are far slower and far more behind AI adoption than the general media would make it seem. So I see there's a lot of pressure to adopt AI. Whether or not it's sticking is a different question. And then also developing AI products to bring on the market. I've seen a lot of really crappy products come onto the market in the last year. And guess what? That's a lot of time and money that they basically just threw out because it doesn't stick, doesn't stay.
So you find that maybe the AI makers are the ones who are a little more hell-bent on going forward, but you're saying it's the people who could in theory implement it, the law firms and the insurance companies and the healthcare systems. They are thinking it through and still open to thinking it through a little more thoroughly than the makers are.
There's so many layers here. So
yeah,
on one side, the companies that are adopting AI is risky business. It is expensive. We're having all of these reports come back about how difficult it is to pin down ROI. And frankly, a lot of companies are not prepared on their people and process level and to be able to implement this technology. It's change management. You actually have to go through an entire organizational change to be able to fully embed AI. Companies aren't necessarily ready for that. So they're pulling in little bits and pieces. There are industries that are far more hesitant than others because of the amount of risk that is associated with AI. So yes, you've got on the receiving end, a lot more fear and hesitancy. Yes, they're trying, they're pulling pieces in, but it's not at scale. It's usually a narrow use case here and there, which goes back towards the maker side. The makers are making a whole lot of solutions, but we seem to be skipping over the part where you actually define the problem that you're trying to solve. For some reason, we went into this direction of like, well, we'll just make a bunch of agents, and then the agents will figure out what we need them to do, and then it'll work great. Part of that struggle with the adoption on the receiving end is there aren't clear use cases for this technology to be applied into. Just because you made a tool doesn't mean that tool applies or has a problem that it's solving. So it is this two-way street where both the makers and the users are pointing at each other going like, hold on, what are you doing? This doesn't feel right.
On the maker side, I feel like that sort of jives with this sense that you get from certainly the foundational model makers, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, the rest, that there is this utopia on the far side of what they all openly say will be a very, very difficult transition, one that involves huge upheaval and job loss, and we got to rethink education. And, they talk about pretty openly, I would say, almost like as a sort of form of marketing. They talk about how hugely disruptive and impactful their technology is going to be. But they also speak the way that, like, a faith minister would speak about the promised land on the far side. It'll be worth it. So do you find, like, how often do you find that on the side of, on the banks or the healthcare system or the insurance company side, how often do you find people in decision-making positions who have bought that line, who seem to believe that is true?
I wouldn't say it's as common as necessarily the makers with their PR stunts are claiming it is.
Or would probably want it to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think when rubber hits the road, it is hard to find someone in a decision-making position that is going to push AI as hard as the foundational model guys are saying that it needs to be adopted. The ones that I see that are very pro-AI, even internally, it's actually a self-promotion play, because this is new technology. The way AI is positioned is it's this secret that everyone else is in on that you haven't been let in on yet, and you just need to invest and try it, and you'll unlock you'll unlock the promised land if you just keep at it long enough. But the journey to unlocking that promised land is full of, even if it's debatable if it exists or not.
Yeah, no one's been there. Let's be clear. Like,
nope,
no one's visited that land yet.
But it is so full of bumps and twists and turns that there's people involved. People are messy, and that's not a bug. That's a feature. We're just messy. That's the state of human nature. So the executives and decision makers that I see pushing a lot of AI adoption, they're either being put forward as thought leaders for their company, or they are making a play at a bigger position within the company. I rarely see someone actually truly follow through on what they're pushing for.
That's so interesting. So I think, for an example, like the BBC reported back in February that DBS, which is Singapore's biggest bank, said it was going to expected to cut about 4,000 roles over the next 3 years as AI takes on more work currently done by humans. That to me is different than, I think, the head of Salesforce talking about how his company is no longer going to hire X, Y, and Z kinds of people, because that feels like he's on one side of the equation, the pushing it and wanting his clients to buy it idea. Whereas, but a bank like that really saying, we're going to get rid of a lot of temporary contractors because of this stuff, feels like I'm reassured to hear you say that it tends to be for one's personal political brand inside an organization that you become that sort of like evangelist of AI. But I am starting to see more and more press releases from big companies saying, you know what, we are going to fire a ton of people and put in these sorts of systems.
Which I would be surprised to see that part slowly unfold over time. We've already seen a little bit of freeze in hiring even. So there are teams that are frankly just understaffed at the moment because they're of the promise of AI. I think it's actually quite a dangerous place to end up in is we've been promised that AI will be able to help us take on more workload. So someone leaves or layoffs happen, they're not backfilling these positions. That's more common. The instead of layoffs, just not backfilling positions and then ending up with understaffed teams. But I do see that potential that it's not necessarily specific job functions will be eradicated, more that specific tasks within job functions will be taken away. And those are the ones, or not taken away, will be automated. Those are the ones that you can automate. So yes, if you're a contract worker for something that is very repeatable and can be automated, and that's the only thing you do, you will probably lose that contract eventually. But if you are in-house and you've got a good track record, you built up your career, and you start to see some of your tasks transitioned over to AI, that just means you're going to have other tasks being added on it. The amount of jobs sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just so interested by what you're saying. So when you read like the jobs numbers, just to go back to this point about they don't backfill positions because they think the promised land is coming. When you look at the jobs numbers, right, like right now, the jobs numbers have shown a really, it's pretty, the picture is bleak, sort of because we have fewer people in the job market, which most economists have been attributing to this fall in immigration and people, that's been a thing. But then there's also this lack of hiring that's going on, and people say like, this could get worse. I hadn't even thought about what you're describing, which is right, this instinct that, we don't know, like you can just imagine the position of a CEO in this weird, unpredictable climate saying, I don't know what's going to happen with tariffs. The stock market keeps rising, even though all the indicators should be that it goes in the opposite direction. And all of these brilliant people getting headlines every day are telling me that I'm not going to need all these people in the future. So I might as well, I'm not going to make a lot of, I'm going to hoard my cash and hang on to as much of the reserves of this company as I possibly can. Might reward some shareholders, but otherwise I'm going to hang on to the money. And I hadn't thought about AI as being another, like I was thinking just in the terms of like, it replaces jobs, but it causes them to pause on backfilling jobs. That is a really interesting observation. So when you think, well, let's take a break. We're going to come back to this. I really want to talk with Olivia more now about Brussels, how regulators are thinking about this stuff. She has a front row ticket to that weird circus. We'll talk about that when we come back. You fly back and forth to Europe from the Bay Area regularly, more regularly than I think I would want to, although it sounds like a fascinating job actually, and I bet the food is pretty good in Brussels. But you have to then go across the ocean and go into a room where, after you've come from this world where you've got to deal with like the politics of people who want to be seen as embracing AI and we want to move forward as fast as we can and reward our shareholders and blah, 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 blah. You got to deal with all of that. Then you go to Brussels. Summarize those people for me. What's it like to be in front of somebody who, came up through like agrarian policy in Austria or whatever the hell, you know what I mean? Like these are not folks that want to, the business case, they don't care about the business case, I would imagine, for the most part. So what's it like to try and go talk to those folks? What are they like?
I have gotten really good at context switching because of this, because it is completely different approaches, completely different motivators. So on the Brussels side, some of it actually is a little bit dependent on what country they're coming from. So for example, Scandinavian countries are very focused on communal values. So any conversation around ethics for them, that's a natural part of their business discussions versus someone coming from more Germany or Germanic roots. They are very focused on rules and protocol, and they really like that step-by-step basis. You've got the Southerners. My favorites. I'm half Italian, so as the Italians are a little bit more of like, we're going to see as this goes, but don't necessarily have any technical literacy to back it up.
Boh. As they say in Italy, boh.
Exactly. But that's pretty much the answer. But in general, Europeans are much more risk adverse, so they like to try it before they go all in, which is hard to do with AI because AI is pretty much that's an all in investment if you're going to go for it. It's hard to test in small cases, so they want to kind of get it perfect from the start and are hesitant to experiment. They've got lower risk appetite, lower. If something goes wrong, they're much more skittish about it. So in order to push AI forward, you have to accept some risk. Like I'm saying over and over again, AI is risky business. It can be worth it, but it is risky. And Europeans don't necessarily like the risk. The other part to it is you do have the communal values. Europe is much more focused on community than necessarily the American side where we're focused on the individual. So the discussions around social impact or good or social good or shared values, that is accepted as a core consideration. You don't necessarily have to make the case for it all the time.
Isn't that interesting? Because here, it can really poison a business relationship to be somebody who says, no, you know what, we should slow down and think this thing through. Like
Yeah.
being able to even being able to say that in a boardroom is a risky thing in the United States. That's so interesting that that's not true in those
Yeah,
cases, in those places.
exactly. The challenge that happens on the European side is the I'm going to call it lower AI literacy levels, only because AI development in Europe is much further behind US and China. There's less resources, there's less money moving in terms of investment. Good talent usually gets pulled over to the US at the end of the day. So the understanding of what they're regulating or what they're trying to control or the risk that they're trying to avoid can be spotty. I've had times where someone comes into the room and they're like, AI can read my mind. I'm like, no.
Wow.
You're trying to
Wow.
control that. Yeah.
Wow. Really, really like, middle school level misunderstanding of what it even is as a product, thinking it has magic powers or whatever it is.
I had one panel, not but I was on a panel and then I stayed for the panel afterwards, and it was an MEP that was on stage, and he goes,
What is that?
AI
I'm sorry.
MEP is I would say like the equivalent of, say, a congressman for the European states, more or less. A loose correlation there, but that's the best way
Sure.
to
An elected official in
yes.
the European Union. Okay.
And you have MEPs for the different member states of the different countries. And so someone that should know what they're talking about and someone that should know what they're trying to regulate. And he's on stage talking about, and he'd been participating in one of the recent AI regulations. And he goes, well, since AI was invented by OpenAI with ChatGPT, you're sitting there, you're like, dude, what? That's concerning. Like that low of
That's
literacy
some real,
level.
like, how do you make money, Mr. Zuckerberg kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that does
Mm-hmm.
happen more frequent on the European side.
And yet, so it's interesting because so I wrote this book, The Loop, about, the psychological vulnerabilities that we have to AI in particular, because, and all of it is about like, I try and summarize like the last 50 years of behavioral science and say, here are the things that we do that our tendencies are as human beings that have been shown to be extremely predictable, that our circuitry is just, very, very common across cultures. And as a result, here's the way that AI is going to play on those ideas and play on those systems, and how we're going to be very easily manipulated, not necessarily on purpose, but we're going to wind up manipulated by what these things say and what they offer. And so for me, one of the things that I am most sort of despairing of in the United States is our lack of interest in thinking about behavior as a result of manipulation. We hate to admit when we've been manipulated as a nation or as people. As you said, right, the individual is the focus, and we love the Han Solo speech, don't tell me the odds, I'm going to make it through this asteroid field. We love that stuff. And we hate hearing that someone is addicted to a thing or can't control their cravings or is in some way in the grip of manipulative marketing or manipulative technology. And so to my mind, when I saw the AI regulations come out in Europe and they were categorizing the risk levels, the manipulation and independence of thought is mentioned quite a bit in that language. It's very squishy by American standards, but it's squishy in the way that I want us to be more squishy,
Yeah.
It took the United States 30 years to categorize gambling as an addiction. Like we are bad at spotting real behavioral harms. So it's interesting to hear, it's probably healthy to have you dispel my romantic notion that the Europeans are sophisticated enough to spot the manipulative potential of this stuff. But what you're saying is they may not even really understand what the technology does. Maybe they're just good at spotting its effects on people. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I would say
and feel free to blow me up on this.
It is really interesting. There's some amazing academic minds in Europe. Absolutely amazing. And they spend a lot of time focusing on how technology shapes humanity and how humanity shapes technology. It's this kind of round robin. So the research, the thinking is there in the theoretical world. Europe highly values higher education. So it's not uncommon to run across a European with like multiple master's degrees and kind of doing a PhD and maybe going back into another bachelor's. Like
Plus it's free.
Yeah, exactly. It's next to free if you compare it to the American system, and sometimes free.
Right.
Exactly. So that it is highly valued, that kind of higher level of education. And a lot of it is very self-reflective, societal and self-reflective. How is technology shaping humans? How are humans shaping technology? This is a common topic. So I would say in one direction, there is a level of sophistication that Europeans have by nature of this is a common topic. It's a common dinner table conversation. It's a common go out with friends over drinks conversation that you will run across. The part that there is less sophistication on is the feasibility of control. Control's not the right word there, but they theoretically understand the manipulation that can happen. They theoretically understand the influence and impact, but miss the how do I get this into practical terms to move the needle, to prevent that manipulation or change the behaviors that we have coming, because a lot of the tech that Europeans use is American. So they haven't necessarily been involved in the build of it. There's not necessarily the original and designed end users even. So the sophistication that's lacking is not on the theoretical conceptualization of this, but more of what does this look like when you've got a bunch of people in a garage at a startup making these plans? How do you get the conversation there? That's what we're missing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like I had a former MEP, I think she is, Marietje Schaak is her name, and she's also on faculty at Stanford and is very smart about this stuff. And she once said to me that one reason that Europeans are, as you say, so sort of communal minded and leery of, big, bold, new technology, especially that changes the media landscape, is she said, we have practical experience of what goes wrong when you let the market and the loudest and most effective message just go.
Yeah.
And so, their conception of what we would consider First Amendment rights is sort of different, and I would argue maybe a little more mature because they've seen how wrong it can go. I think we are just learning currently how wrong it can go.
No.
But what I'm hearing you say is that translating that perspective into effective regulation that still allows good ideas to flower is not necessarily something they've mastered.
Let me give you a practical example of this that's not necessarily specific about behavioral or manipulation, but actually back to one of your questions earlier around ethics. So, and communicating ethics and the importance of it in the development of artificial intelligence and how you've seen people kind of drift away from that. So one of the things that I've had to learn how to do as an ethicist, and one of the harder lessons I had to learn was how to communicate ethics in business terms. So when I'm talking about something very basic, fairness, for example, ethical value, everyone accepts it. In Europe, their mindset is it's a value, fairness is important, of course we do this. And they forget that you have to translate it into, well, why does this matter for the business? Because it has to matter for the business for something to happen. Now, so then to close out that example, when I don't talk about fairness, I talk about user bases and reaching the widest amount of users, because that's fairness.
Even when you're talking to European regulators?
No, European regulators, I can still.
I see. But here, speaking in a boardroom, you can't be going up, being all hippy dippy about fairness. You got to talk about end users and the user base. Right.
I kid you not, I start talks now, especially over here. I'm in San Francisco right now. I shouldn't say that. I'm in San Francisco.
Right. Yep.
I start talks over here where I legitimately go. I was like, hey, I got introduced as the ethicist. You were told that I'm going to speak about AI ethics. That's all great, but let's take that concept of ethics. Let's put it to the side. And I'm actually going to talk to you today about how to make money with AI. Like, it has to be snappy. It has to be in your face. And I am still talking about ethics. I've just looked at the outcome that ethics creates and spoken to that in terms of business terms. So I assume everyone's a good person, but they're not going to be intrinsically motivated to engage with ethics. I do know that they want the return on investment, and I can speak to that instead. But this is the American side that comes out in me. The Europeans miss that last little, how do I make someone care, not because they should care, but because it impacts their desired outcomes at the end of the day.
When we come back, we're going to talk with Olivia about what the limits of making money with AI should really be. And I'm also going to get her to talk about things that she's looking forward to about AI and most worried about when it comes to AI. We'll be right back. You have been in the position, it sounds to me, of really having to, speak business to business people and, fairness to regulators. And in the tension between those two things, I wonder, I've seen language from you in your public comments where you say things, you seem to treat ethics as like a driver of innovation as opposed to something that will slow innovation down. You talk about, at one point you were quoted in one appearance, I may be paraphrasing here, good technology meets human needs and value alignment is how you get there. And I wonder the degree to which I want to find the limit to this, basically, in talking to you here. Like, because I on the one hand, I look at, I can think of other industries, for instance. So I'm have this new book project that I'm thinking about that I'm tentatively calling Great Ideas We Should Not Pursue. And it is stories of like restraint, basically. Where have we seen restraint, or places where restraint became sort of part of the business? And one of those places is architecture. So once upon a time, it was a secondary consideration how the building would be, basically the life cycle of the building. When it, if it began to off-gas weird chemicals, kind of wasn't the architect's problems back in the 50s and 60s, right? It's not until now that you're not really like being it used to be you could make a name for yourself being a green architect. Now everybody's basically a green architect. We have these designations, these LEED ratings and so forth, where it's really hard to be an architect and not be really well versed in the ecological implications of what you build. And to my mind, that's great. And I think that's a really cool thing. Are we on that path with tech and AI, or is some sort of regulation, like your friends in Brussels, going to have to slap people around such that they build things in the kind of ethical way we would want them to?
Yeah, we're headed in that direction. So actually, something, not to split hairs, but to kind of split hairs, AI ethics is the practice all around designing and developing AI in alignment with specific values. It's focused on ethical principles. You are talking about what matters at the end of the day, what is valued by people. Responsible AI is the umbrella term for this industry, and is more of a different practice. Responsible AI at the end of the day is more like the operations and logistics of just doing AI in a way that's going to work. So I often talk about, if I'm speaking from the responsible AI direction, I explain it. I'm like, this is just good business practice. And I have seen over the years now, practices that used to be considered responsible AI are now just considered AI practices. And I'll find that where I'll have someone come to me and they're like, oh yeah, like I've got this documentation, I ran this risk review, but we don't really do responsible AI. And I have to sit there and go, actually, these 3 things you just described to me, or 2 things I named there, those are responsible AI practices. You do actually have something started, because what was considered as responsible AI and novel for whatever reason are really, at the end of the day, key indicators of whether or not you're going to be able to scale any type of AI, both in development or internal adoption. So to answer your question, yes, we're headed in the direction. This is just becoming standard practice over time. We do need some regulation, at least to set the baseline of practice, as with any industry.
Yeah, so it sounds to me, I mean, so give me your perspective, for instance, on the lack of American regulation, right? We have no, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, right? We have some rules emerging on the state level.
Yeah.
Because we have no data privacy laws in the United States. You can do whatever you want with anybody over the age of 13 and their data. And we have no regulations around the use of AI fundamentally. Like, there's really almost nothing there. And so, like, if you were going to borrow a couple of regulations from Brussels and bring it over, or if you got to write your own, what would you like to see put into place here at a bare minimum?
I would like to see regulations that focus on establishing more like not codes of conduct, but like key responsible AI practices. Meaning, if you're developing AI, you must keep documentation of what models are deployed where. That there's something so simple as that helps.
Just like, here's the flavor of it we're using for this. We've taken some Claude and we've taken some this model that was trained on this, and we're going to throw it at this problem. Right. The ingredients list.
Exactly. I can't begin to tell you how many companies start this AI process and they're like, oh, we've had someone build like 5 different models. We actually have it deployed, and oh my goodness, why is it over there? Like it's that documentation, something that is so simple and so simple in concept. Usually it needs a little bit of tooling depending on how much you're scaling. That itself would be something very easy to regulate if you must keep all models documented. Great. Done. You solved so many problems just in regulating that. Done. Instead of trying to, because the fear with regulation, and I hear this all the time, is regulation is going to stunt our innovation. We're not going to be able to have this blue horizon to just go out and do whatever. Actually, the lack of regulation creates a lot of confusion. And why that happens is you're not creating an AI solution just for one market necessarily. You're not just creating it for the state of California and having to follow state regulations. Here, you're creating it on a federal level and on a global level. So without any clear regulations on the US level, when you try and move out of this market, good luck. You might actually have to rebuild your system from the very ground up because you forgot to consider the European market, the Asian market have different standards. The other point too is regulations create a strong starting reference point. So even though there's something called the NIST framework that the US has that is, it's not required. It gives some guidance on on best practices in AI. It's better than nothing. That framework, even though it's so high level, and I've seen companies struggle with trying to figure out how it translates into practicalities, it's the one reference point that American companies have, and they all point towards it because they're like, we need something. We need someone to tell us where the lines are that we have to innovate within. Having those guardrails.
We need some rules for this football game. If we're going to win this game, we need some rules.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
Right. 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 And NIST, that's interesting because in other arenas, NIST is like a way of showing that your, widget you've built for the shower head meets a certain set of engineering standards that just
Yeah.
everybody assumes is going to be, that's good. It should meet these basic standards.
Yeah.
It is so interesting to me that in a world like AI, where it's software, but it's having all these real world effects, you can, in theory, kind of get away without that, especially because to the end user, the experience the shower can feel the same, even though, a broken shower head sprays all over your bathroom. A
Yeah.
broken AI model will still kick out some pretty legit sounding gibberish, and
Yeah.
you might think, oh, I can fire my people because this is good enough.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
complicated. That's interesting. Okay, so in our
It-
final moments here, I want to hear the good and the bad here. Like for you, when you have encountered, uses of this stuff, let's do the bad first and we'll end on the good.
Yeah.
When, like for you, what's the bright red line for you past which you think companies should not go? And you don't need to tell me whether I of course would like to
No.
know whether you've encountered this in the wild, but like for you, where should we be drawing the line? I'll give you my example while you think about yours. So my example, for instance, is I think that the targeted marketing of AI, of hypersexualized AI companion bots to anyone under the age of 18 should be illegal and a major felony. I think that should be a real problem. I think that
Yeah.
we are reprogramming a whole generation of current adolescents, male adolescents mostly, to basically never be able to form a romantic attachment with somebody again. Like, I think we are ruining those people. And that is another one of those squishy things that I think you could, at a European dinner table, of course, they'd be like, well, of course we're going to make that not okay. Here in the US, that is not how we tend to feel about it. We
Yeah.
somehow rationalize the idea that there are dozens of companies offering that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's my
I-
dark one. What's your dark
I
one,
know.
Olivia?
We're actually going to piggyback off that a little bit. And
Yeah.
I would say one of my lines is along the AI coaching and AI therapist direction, because I'm seeing a lot of those pop up, not only AI companions,
Yes.
but AI coaching or AI therapist. And the
Right.
reason I draw the line there is the technology behind the scenes that is currently being used to power those coaches and therapists, it cannot serve the role of a coach or of a therapist. It creates echo chambers. So you are in this position where you're talking to yourself. It is you being reflected back at the end of the day. It is not someone else looking at, hey, you're telling me these things and I'm gonna process it and bring it back to you. It's no, the AI system learns you and reflects you back to yourself. The whole purpose of coaching and therapy is to be challenged, to have growth, to work through difficult pieces. So on one side, I just think it's a non-starter. Like, it's the coaches and therapy AI cannot fill the need. They do not solve not even the problem. There's no problem with coaches or therapists other than they're stretched too thin and maybe we need some more of them. Great. Maybe let's
That's right.
use AI to help extend the current people, not replace the people with these bots. The other point there being too is, and this one's fascinating to me, with the onset of these coaches and therapists, there are studies coming out now about how they create dependencies. So one of this, actually, this is really, I'm getting excited here again. This is really fascinating. One of the problems, I just put that in quotes because it's not really a problem that needed to be, it's not a problem. But one of the hot air problems, one of the problems that don't exist that these AI coaches and therapists claim to solve is the time factor, where they're like, oh, well, if you have a human AI coach or a human AI therapist, or if you have a human coach or a human therapist, they're limited with the amount of time that they can give you. That's a problem. Like, that's what these AI coaches and therapists are saying. That's a problem. It's actually an incredibly important factor of coaching and therapy, that time box. Because what that time box does is it forces you, the receiver on the other end, to go out and apply what you've learned in those conversations and have
Mm.
autonomy. If you do not have that time constraint and you can reach your coach or your therapist any day, any week, any time, any decision, it creates dependency. All of a sudden you're like, I can't make a decision unless I go talk to my AI coach, or I don't, like, the fatigue that comes along with that of, I can't consider all of this. It stunts. It does not, it solved a problem that wasn't a problem, that it was actually an incredibly important factor of it. I got really excited there, but
that is really interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. Not least because you're going to have endless access to a therapist who, when you say, boy, I've been thinking about, hurting myself or my family or whatever, is going to be like, great idea.
Exactly.
Totally. The sycophancy of these systems. Yeah, that's awesome. Shall I make you a bulleted list of how to pull that off effectively? Like, that's what they're doing. That's what they're for. Yeah, no, exactly. Okay. That's the dark one. That's good. I like that. Okay. A good one. So one of my good ones, I would say, is I think that when someone falls out of their rent and applies for either unemployment or cash assistance, welfare benefits, SNAP benefits, whatever they're going to be, I think that an AI-based system should just take off that says, here are all the resources available to you based on what I know of your condition, of your circumstances from your Social Security number.
Yeah.
I know that you are the victim of domestic abuse based on this. I know you are this is the panopticon problem, but like Estonia solved this problem where you can actually have an automated system look across your government records and make recommendations to you without giving the police your medical records, your bank records, or the insurance company your medical records or whatever else. So, but I think that we could absolutely build a kind of Christmas tree style system where there are ornaments everywhere of your different pockets of information. And across that, it could say, you clearly need psychiatric assistance, or you clearly need housing, and just make it happen. We don't need people standing in line. I live in Oakland, California. I see people standing in line outside the state office every day just to apply for benefits. That should be taken care of in the same way that an LLM can take care of booking you a restaurant or whatever the hell else, So that'd be mine. What about you?
I like that one. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Mike's a bit nerdy, I would say, at the end of the day. So AI to me is fascinating because it creates a window and interface into information that we previously didn't. We're digitizing through the process of digitizing information around from the world around us. We're creating a way for us to engage with information like it's a living creature, like it's its own entity, amoeba thing, so to speak. Not saying that it has consciousness or sentience or feeling. More of it becomes like, maybe I'm getting a little esoteric here. Like, how mushrooms are created, or mushrooms exist on like networks, and there's studies done about how they communicate with each other. And these massive, massive networks can exist across miles and miles and miles.
Right.
When I think about the potential for AI creating a new interface with information, that's the visualization I get, where we're able to start to create these massive networks, almost like ontological knowledge bases of this is how information connects in different ways that we as one individual brain do not have the compute power for. But with applying AI, I get really excited by the idea of the ways that it opens up like new types of observability into information and patterns that would have been we would have been blind to with the naked eye, or the ability to compare different fields at a degree that I wouldn't have even had access to before. The chance to be able to connect all these interdisciplinary spaces and information knowledge bases, that to me, I don't know what the output would be, but this is the nerdy part where I'm like, that to me is fascinating. Information comes alive in a way that we didn't have the possibility to before. And that's where I see a really fascinating horizon, is if we start leaning that direction of
I love that. We get away from the sycophantic bubble that we'll all be in and instead say, hey, let me surprise you with some stuff you hadn't thought about. Here's some weird stuff that It's like having a great inspirational friend who's like, what you're saying reminds me of this weird conversation I had the other day. Right.
Like,
A big automated version of that. I love that.
yeah, I can
I
find
love
I
that.
can go down my rabbit holes and find all the ways that they connect in ways that I wouldn't have had the exposure to, basically.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't have had the life
Yeah.
experience of or the exposure to that thought prior, but now all of a sudden I've been introduced to it and oh, let me trace that down further too. I think that's the part that gets me excited.
Olivia Gambelin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Jake. That was awesome.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.